Our beliefs take shape in us as a result both of our experience and of the impact of our cultural tradition upon us. So really in the first part I was talking about the second part of that sentence, the cultural tradition that we are a part of. We can't escape it. It is there in the world around us, it shapes us. Whether we are Christian or not, we are part of this culture that has been really shaped by our religious heritage. And that's true, as I say, of people who live exclusively, as they would see it, in the secular world. They are still being shaped by that Judeo-Christian culture. Just over a year ago, now I'm going to talk about the other bit of this sentence. Just over a year ago, I received something of a hammering from another clergy person for, in his opinion, overstating the place of experience in theology. For him, my arguments on this particular topic simply weren't biblical, and I was mistaken in everything that I claimed. He was really nice about it as well. Really generous in sharing all of those thoughts with me. And I've thought about that a lot, because, despite however that conversation was conducted, there was a good challenge in it, and it was an idea worth thinking about. What is the place of experience within theology? I can't get away from the fact that I do firmly believe that experience shapes Christianity, partly because when I look back down the river, I can see how different experiences of God changed the course of the Christian cultural stream. And I've got just a handful of examples which I think make the case. People know who that is? Can you see it that well? I can't see it so well. Jacob. All right, wrestling with the angel. This is one of those annoying translation things where I actually think the assumption of the text is that he is wrestling with God. He's later given the name Israel. It means one who has wrestled with God. So that is more clear to me, but there you go, an artist's depiction. But what we see in the story of Jacob, again, it's that encounter of God. It's about that struggle. It's about things that change him, because he was someone who really needed to be changed. He's a trickster, he's a swindler, and yet his story is ultimately one of grace and redemption and bequeathing something to future generations. So he's remembered as a fond part of the Jewish tradition and of our tradition. This last Sunday, we celebrated our patron saint, Andrew. And again, the thing, I like this picture, by the way. I should have used it on Sunday, because it appeals to me. There's something about being called, about Jesus gathering people in this particular image for me. But again, the thing is, this experience of Andrew just going, oh yeah, okay, I'll drop everything and follow you. Well, why on earth did he do that? It doesn't make sense to say. There had to have been something in that experience of meeting this person that just made him go, yeah, because let's face it, yes, he might have been exceptional, but the truth is, I don't think he was exceptional. I think he was probably pretty average, but something in that encounter with Jesus, when he said, come, I will teach you to fish for people, made him say, yes, I want to step into that. I want to step into that new experience. So again, it comes down to experience. One of the sort of most famous transformations of Scripture is Paul. He goes from being Saul to being Paul. He changes his name in order to reflect that transformational experience. So he has an encounter so profound, he sheds his very legalistic Jewish belief and establishes Gentile Christianity. We just wouldn't be here today had that experience not driven him in this new direction. Some other ones. Anyone know who this is? Oh, good, the Franciscan in the back does. I'm glad about that. St. Francis. This is, so it's Francis on the left, and this is his encounter with a leper. For those of you who, just a potted version of Francis's story, he as a young man, there was a leper colony outside of Assisi, and Francis just hated them. From the very fibre of his being, he hated lepers. He went to great lengths to avoid them. As I say, quite literally, he'd take his horse and ride for miles to go out around the leper colony just so he wouldn't even have to see one at a distance. So a really huge sense of loathing. Through, again, he had a number of experiences, such as, he was imprisoned at one point, he has, conflict with parents and, the whole bit, and a sense of an encounter with God as well, where he says, something else is meant to happen in my life. But he has this moment where he comes across a leper on the road, and confronted with his own revulsion and disgust, he decides to confront it head on. So he gets off his horse, he goes, he sucks the mucus from the face of the leper. I mean, this is really stepping right into the factor. But that's what he does. He steps right into it, and it's a moment of huge transition for him. He spends most of his life living among the rest of his life living among these people and tending to them and caring for them. Huge transformation. But again, it comes down to this pivotal experience. Now, that story's been a little bit mythologised. It's hard to say what, but the story is that, Francis then, having tended to this leper, walked down the street, turned around and sees that the leper is gone. And so there's this idea that maybe the leper that he encounters is actually the presence of Christ in our midst, and that's how he came to understand Christ. Christ is, is the disfigured, the outcast, the lonely, and that's what he decides to move towards in his life and in his own being. I like Francis. What's not to like about that? No guesses on this one?
John
Wesley, yeah, there you go. Great preacher, and so on. And again, someone who is living, he's an Anglican. People keep the Methodists really like to claim him, of course, but he was an Anglican, and so I'm claiming him back just quietly. But again, he had an experience that he couldn't explain. While at prayer, and the words he used is, "I felt my heart strangely warmed," and it gives him a whole new lens on what being religious is about, what being Christian is about. And in the end, all of the ideas and thought and experience and discussion around that experience that he had, and that leads to the fact that this whole movement gathers around those ideas, and eventually it can't be contained by the Anglican Church. It splits off, it becomes the Wesleyans, who we now call the Methodists. So again, he's an influential figure, but it comes down to he had this new experience and something huge flowed out of it. And just quietly, one of my heroes, I talk about this guy a little bit too often, but William Wilberforce. So William Wilberforce, again, encounters slavery in his time, sees the reality of it, and ultimately is persuaded to completely reassess the Christian justification for slavery. He instead reinterprets scripture as well as political ideas and so on in order to say, actually, this has to stop, it must stop, as an expression of my Christian identity. I have to face this down. And it takes him a lifetime to face it down, but ultimately, months after his death, and he really did, he gave his entire life to that cause, that slavery is finally abolished. What a massive thing. But again, it comes from seeing the reality of the suffering that he's moved to change. It wasn't a religion, anyway, that's enough. Julian of Norwich. So again, this is an English mystic. Do you know about Julian? So, mysticism is all about the experience of God. So she has this, she had many visions over the course of her life, but one of the ones that people really love and why she's holding something, you can see that, she's holding a hazelnut, and she has this vision where that's what she sees. She says, she doesn't say it is a hazelnut, she says it's something small like a hazelnut, and she asks, and this was in a vision, she asks, what is it? And she hears, the answer comes to her, which is, it is all that exists. And she has the sense of everything will be okay. And so that's expressed in her writings as all will be well, and all will be well, and yes, all manner of things will be well. Some of you will have heard that, or variations of. So that's Julian, again, an experience of stepping into sort of the largeness of God and having this overwhelming sense of things will be well. And again, where did Martin Luther King's ideas around equality and the need for it come from, if not born of his own experience of injustice? These ideas and his challenge of inequality within his culture were not born of, just happily academically thinking about things or simply reading the Bible one day. It was a very real thing. He experienced the persecution, he lived among it, and he named it and challenged it. So again, the hardship of that aspect of his life became the catalyst for things beyond it. So I think he's kind of still inspirational as well. I think they're all inspirational people. So the people I've just shown have all made really significant contributions to Christianity, and their contribution is born of their experience. Yes, there was reflection and thought as part of that process, but the catalyst each and every time was experience. It was based in the nitty-gritty reality of life, or in their experience and encounter of God in a new way. And that's actually true for all of us. Our experiences shape who we are, and how we come to know God. And I'm just going to share a few things. I'm actually going to grab a prop very quickly. This one's quite special to me. This represents my earliest experience of God. This is the sheepskin that I slept on every night as a child. It's one of them. I actually have another one which is far more worn out. It was a bit too unsightly to bring over. This was the secondary one, which has stood the test of time slightly better. That sheepskin reminds me of how at night I'd be put to bed by my parents and they would always say prayers. But when I think about that, that experience is it's not a process of thinking about God or even talking about God. For me, when I reflect on that, it's a feeling about God. I feel a warmth right in the pit of my stomach, and it's a very dark presence. And for me, that's God. That's my earliest encounter of God, and I can remember that from probably when I was about the same age as my daughter is now. It's an experience. Here's another one. For me, the tui always reminds me of that part of God which our tradition names as the Holy Spirit. Again, where does that come from? It comes from an experience. This was because and I've told some of you this story, I was once leading a group of teenagers on a tramp during the summer holidays in the Tararuas. Things went extremely pear-shaped on that particular tramp. One of the young men who was an epileptic began having seizures, and it all went downhill from there. But on that occasion, sort of 36 hours into this incident, it was a tui that flew down out of the trees and sat beside me when I was really at this point of despair. And it was a point where I really thought this kid was going to die, actually. For me, that presence of that bird in that place at that time spoke to me far more deeply of God than any sermon I have ever heard. I've heard some good sermons, but this one was just better. Just picked them all. Okay, another experience. I'm not going to dwell on this one very much, other than to say that, again, there is something quite transformative about meeting the person who helps you find the best in yourself. Sometimes finds the worst in myself too, but mostly the best in myself.